to restore trust in our community, improve performance, and gain efficiency. The investigations into the murders of John O'Keefe, Boston police officer, and Sandra Birchmore caused significant damage to the credibility of our police force. Restoring trust with citizens and ensuring safety for all is paramount. An impartial review by an independent firm will provide expert opinion and offer ways to improve policing operations and gain efficiencies and benefit taxpayers. Successful businesses routinely conduct impartial audit reviews without issues. Petitioners sought to avoid conflict of interest and made it clear that whoever chaired the committee should have no affiliation with the police or be an embedded townie. Mr. Scollins chose Bob McCarthy to chair this committee, citing Bob's extensive service, including 30 years on the Building Renovation Committee. What Mr. Scollins did not share is that for 2 decades, our police chiefs have also been serving on that committee. Bob is not only affiliated with our police, he's an embedded townie and represents the complete opposites of what the voters were seeking. At special town meeting, Bob publicly blasted the Finance Committee for rewriting the article beyond its original scope and for making a bad situation worse. He argued the article was legally unenforceable and to stop pandering to the disruptive minority and move on. Sourcing an independent audit firm is project management. Successful projects include a champion or a chair who support the project's goals and have the expertise to motivate the team towards a successful outcome. Successful business leaders would never appoint an angry, disgruntled person with strong opposition to lead or participate in any improvement initiative. That type of individual would do everything in their power to derail the project, and the desired outcome would never be achieved. For 2 months, Kathleen and I reached out to Mr. Scollins for an update on the 2/1 start date and informed him that we would be representing the petitioners. In his letter announcing Bob McCarthy, Mr. Scollins included language that was never discussed or agreed upon. The Finance Committee's approved language was the creation of a committee of 5, the Chief Procurement Officer or his designee, 2 members to be nominated by the petitioners, and 2 community members at large to be nominated to and selected by the Chief Procurement Officer or his designee. Mr. Scollins inserted the following verbiage into his letter and stated that Mr. McCarthy would add 2 members from the petitioners following a transparent and democratic process, and voting would be conducted by mailing by Bob's soon-to-be secretary. Electing petitioners, I'm going to ask you, let me finish. Thank you, Mr. Theodore. Electing petitioners was never discussed or approved. Furthermore, in Canton's elections, he has allowed me to continue, so I'm asking you to please be polite. Thank you. Electing petitioners was never discussed or approved. Furthermore, Canton elections are not run by secretaries. I have spent 30 years in the corporate leadership, spearheading process improvement initiatives, delivering record results. During the last 8 years of my professional career, I worked directly with every state office in our country. It's time to adopt the best practices that work so well in the private sector and stop this good old boy form of management. The voters have spoken. Honor their wishes and appoint a champion who will help advance the cause and not sabotage it. And lastly, for the viewers at home, Mr. Scollins was the gentleman in the Finance Committee who sat here. And I just want you to know, Mr. Albert, it did not go unnoticed, the kudos that you gave to Mr. Collins.
Okay. I gave you time now.
Okay,
pensions plays. Just our IT expense alone is costing us about $6,000, and then we have some other miscellaneous expenses. So that is an area that's running hot. And the other area that's running hot is insurance. I talked to Randy about this. Same as going on with the town. We had a $7,000 appropriation for our insurance. It renews in June, and I've already been told that our estimated cost for this year's expenses not $7,000 anymore. It's $10,265. So that's an essential cost that we're again having to pay now with charitable contributions. So let's go on to our request. So as I am going to talk about our request for this year, I'm going to point you to two columns. I'm going to point you to, I know you have to go with a base budget. I get that, but our real run rate cost to operate, and this isn't any of these events or anything like that. This is just a cost to do our main operations here, is running at $79,000 a year. So let's go to the next page of what our asks are. Our asks for this year, our current salaries are running at $35,500. We are asking for $45,000 for salaries, and how do we get that? It's our $35,500 for the two employees that we have right now, with a 3% increase is an extra $1,000. However, we need some help with our media support and creating some things, and we're getting that done on a volunteer basis right now, but we're asking for an extra $2,500 to increase the salary for that person. And the last thing is, we have a website that the town just invested $20,000 to help us redesign our website. We're going to need maintenance on that and continued support on that. So we're asking for, and again, whether that goes in the salary bucket or whether that is going to be in professional services, I don't know, but we're asking to go for $45,000 in the salary bucket. For the other big increase this year is for cleaning and maintenance. Our budget last year was $12,000, and that included, the estimate of what the cleaning of the bathrooms would be. And that cost now is going to be $29,000 to clean both the barn on a biweekly basis. That's just maintenance of the barn. And then we had committed to clean the bathrooms that are in the park. And by the way, the bathrooms that are in the park, they're not our assets. This is on the town property. It's they bought the CPA bought the bathrooms on town property, and Charlie Duty made a commitment to the neighbors that it would be cleaned 3 times a week. So the cost to do that, which is very reasonable, we've got a lot of estimates, is going to be $29,000. So a big chunk of our increased request is because we're going to have now a bathroom in the park that's going to need to be maintained. I originally came in asking for $10,000 for our professional consulting services, but because this year we will have all our ARPA grant money coming in, we're going to be generating over $500,000 of revenues this year, which means we're going to need a full audit. And I have 2 quotes on this. $15,000 is about the cost for a full audit next year. As a startup audit, they're going to have to review last year's financials, this year's financials, and the first year of an audit is going to be a little bit time consuming. So it's the estimate for that is $15,000. Again, we didn't change anything for our holiday event, our event support, our holiday event, and the Heritage Day support. We're asking for $5,000 for that. The $2,000 of office supplies, we're going to need toilet paper along with the IT that we have, the IT things. I mean, we're talking basic things: Microsoft, file storage, Adobe, that's what our IT request is. That's running about $7,000 a year now. We bumped that up to $7,500 to cover the cost of the toilet paper. And the last thing is, like I said, the quote for the renewal this year is already at 10,265. I bumped that up by 5% for the following year. And so I know this is like hard for the finance committee to look going from 66 to 117, but everything that I just talked about here, these are basic services that a town municipal department needs. And that's kind of what we are here. We can't reach over and ask anybody else in town hall for our little supplies. Every time we want to hang a picture, we got to go buy a nail. And that's what we're asking for. And I know it's less. So I'm going to stop here and let you ask some questions. And then I want to show you the last couple of pictures of where we are as an organization and what it looks like.
I just want to mention at the beginning of the meeting that we are going to encourage folks to use the hand raise feature. Just it makes it easier to kind of see who's in the queue with questions and comments. So, we do have some members of the public with us this evening. We do our discussion amongst the committee. And then certainly if there's a question or comment from the public on the agenda item before us, we're happy to connect with, engage you and have you join us, and all comments need to come through the chair. So with that, I'll go to Amelia.
Thanks, Cindy. Thanks, Alan, for the presentation, and for everyone, and thanks everyone on the trust there for everything they do for this, great asset to our town. Understanding that, this is a great investment and it's improved the downtown as a destination, and obviously there's a great historic preservation aspect and cultural aspect to it. The rising costs of the budget, how do you see a way forward to make it more solvent? I mean, I don't object to the town supporting the trust, but it's the idea is it for it to be solvent. How is there more grants that can be obtained? Is there more things that can be done?
My perspective, and I think I said this 3 years ago when we were starting at zero, I said, we have to think about where we're going. We're going to a museum. When we have a museum, we can start charging admissions and start using the rents from the restaurant to help supplement this. We'll still need a base budget. And I think I can go back and look at what I had said back when, but I had always said back maybe 2-3 years ago that our fundraising efforts will be able to support our programs, our the things that we're doing for the communities, but the other elements of this that we are, municipal department, everyone at town hall has a computer with software on it, with they go to the bathroom in town hall and they're using their own, and they have pencils and papers and things like that. There's nobody in town hall that is managing these $2 million, multi-million-dollar buildings. That's what our organization is doing. And so I had always said from the startup that we are always going to need a base budget. And so it was going to be hard for this town during our ramp up period. But I always thought it would be somewhere between, 200 and 250, which would be where we would plateau at. And then we that with all our fundraising and our other income streams that we will have once this is a real museum, that is what it's going to be to have this park, this museum be what it's supposed to be. You could do something in this space for, you could turn it into pickleball courts if you want. You're still going to have somebody managing the use of this building. We have to have a body at that building if we're going to open it up to the public. So I think that you need to understand that there's going to be a basic cost to run that operation over there that is the town's cost. And right now you're getting a lot of things for cheap because you got volunteers doing it. But I do think you're going to need a base budget that's around 200,000, and it's not ramping up fast enough for how quickly we're developing it.
And I support the whole investment that the town's been doing there. I noticed that the capital, second question, I noticed from the Community Preservation Committee that there was a $200,000 request for a pavilion that wasn't approved. And so I was wondering how much that impacts I would guess it would be maybe more for fiscal year 26 or something than 25, perhaps. But how does that impact your future projections for revenue? And is there a plan B to possibly get that built in the future?
Yeah, we're working on a plan B. I don't know if I should say what it is. We got some really good ideas, but I mean, we're moving very slowly with the rental use of that property. I mean, we had one wedding there, and it was a lot more work and effort than we could have ever imagined. We got 2 that are already scheduled there this year, and one of those came with a very sizable donation towards a capital campaign. So people love this area. It would have been nice to have a pavilion for like that outdoor children event that we had, that children's concert. It was a rainy day this year. The year before we had 600-700 people at that thing. Everybody was outdoors. Everybody was gathered around. This year was a rainy day. They had to bring it into the barn. It would be nice to have that pavilion out there to be able to have a lot of cultural things out there, the plays or movie nights and things like that. Put picnic tables out of there so people can really enjoy the park. We are in the works with a major donor that we think we have a possibility of getting that funded in a different way, with them using it for some of their nonprofit things. So knock on wood if that materializes, but we were hoping to get that donor to help contribute to our museum. So there's only a few people around that are going to be making some significant donations, and we just got to make sure that we're applying them to the right place.
I would also add, Emilio, that we're still continuing, as Alan said, with this project in some fashion. We may be back next year if we can't get something in the interim, and I apologize for my cold. But we also have decided to devote design dollars to it, design dollars that we've raised separately. And that was part of our CPA application. And we're continuing to do that regardless of the fact that we didn't get it this year. So those design dollars, which are between $20,000 and $50,000, will be spent by us on that behalf.
Great. Thanks to you both.
Dan?
Yeah. Hey, Al. So did you say the revenue was about $500,000 that you were planning for this FY25 budget? I don't know if that was right.
FY 2025.
So the money that the revenue that you expect to generate.
So what I'm saying is, for this fiscal year, we will have about $500,000 of more than $500,000 of revenues. But one thing is really important. Like, these are coming from grants where you can't spend a penny of that for other things. So we received $405,000 of money from the Norfolk County and it was for design purposes only. We couldn't spend it for other things. We have spent that on that. So now that comes in as revenue for us. We have a state grant money that is for the design and development of. So that was a $200,000 grant. We received 100, but that is specific. We have to submit detailed paperwork. Randy can tell you how much detailed paperwork, making sure that we are spending it for the purposes that we have. We also have a mass cultural grant that was a $200,000 grant, but we had to have matching funds for what we're going to be doing. So all of those big dollars that we're getting in to build our museum, I mean, the design phase is just about done. Victor can speak to that. The building is about to begin of these exhibits and turning this into a museum. But most of the big dollars that are coming in are earmarked for specific things. And you can't spend them for outside of those things.
So is it $500,000 that you were saying that was for
Yeah,
around?
We're going to
roughly?
have $500,000 of revenues this year, and next year we will exceed $500,000 of revenue as we start getting all of those grant monies in.
Right, and then the programs that you would run, so if there was expenses associated with the program, that would come out of the $500,000?
No, you can't run. No, that $500,000 is specific for the development of the museum. We had a grant for a program. We received the Simone Foundation grant. Is going that we had the photography that we got that grant renewed again this year, and we're doing a copper exhibit that's going to be shared. So a lot of times when you get these big dollars in, you apply for them with a purpose in mind and then have to spend it on that purpose. You can't just spend it on my insurance dollars.
No, that's what I meant. So if you had like the Simeone grant, so that's
Yep.
going to run a program, so then the cost to run that program would be from the grant. It wouldn't be
Exactly.
wouldn't be from the town money. Yeah.
And all of our events are self-funded. That's what I showed you on that first page. The dollars in black, we generated whatever. Let me go back up. In the prior year, we generated $19,000 that we spent on our programs. This year, it's going to be a little bit more than that. So yeah, all of these programs and all the things that we're doing out there in the town are self-funding, paying for themselves. We don't make a lot of money on them. We call them fundraising events. Most of them don't make over $1,000. Most of them are making $300-400, but we budget them so that, and then we go and get sponsors, or we go and get whatever we need to pay for the cost of that event. Sometimes we have small admission, or sometimes we, ask for donations from the people. But all of our events that we've been running are self-funded through our donations.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
So I did have a question regarding the custodial services. You indicated that our town administrator had made the commitment that would be cleaned 3 times a week. Was there discussion at that time about where that cost was going to come from?
No. So basically, when the residents found out that the bathrooms were going to be going in, they came in with a number of concerns or whatever, and they asked what our plans were, and I was at the podium and I said, we have in our budget to cover the cost, to pay, for the cleaning of the bathrooms 1 time a week, and everybody was going nuts on that. That's not enough. And so Charlie, acquiesced and said, listen, we're going to make sure that we'll clean them 3 times a week. And then, we also had to put some shrubbery around the building. The people wanted to make sure. I'm hoping that we won't have to do them that much, but I don't think they're going to get that much use. We're going to have, security systems. So I'm hoping that we won't need it all, but he's already committed to doing it 3 times a week. And so again, that would be the first place I would cut. I mean, people were peeing on a tree before. Now, to have a bathroom that's not quite clean,
Well, we might have a different perspective if you look at it. So,
I understand, and I don't want you to cut that money, but I know it's going to be a tough year.
I guess my question was going in a different direction.
One thing, Cindy, if I could get to your question as well, and that is, where was the money to come from? I was at a meeting with representatives of the select board, and we were asked to put it in our budget.
Okay.
That's why it's in our budget, because your question, I think, is a good one, which is, why is it even in your budget? we were asked to put it in our budget. And since we don't technically manage that portion, despite the fact, I should say, that we don't manage that portion of the green, we said, okay, it's of use, it's a value to the community. I mean, ultimately it would be a value to residents and visitors who use it during the Heritage Day. So yes, we said we'll put it in our budget.
Okay, because I think that's where I was going, Nick, is why it isn't, for example, in the Parks and Rec budget where the rest of the maintenance of property.
I think the thought might be that we might do it a little bit more, or a little less expensively by rotating the contract.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say that it's.
I'm good, Alan.
DPW.
Dave?
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Alan, for that presentation. So I just wanted to cover a couple of things. It appears that Chapter 150 is the law that covers the trust, and there's an additional licensing agreement with the town in regards to, you know, some of these expenses that are outlined here, which I would invite everyone, if they haven't seen those agreements, to take a look at them. So the first thing I wanted to address is, I got a couple of things, and then you could answer them at the end. But in regards to the insurance, in the licensing agreement, it says the town, the licensee, which would be the trust, would be responsible for the insurance, as well as picking up the litter. So I don't know if that covers part of the janitorial cost that's mentioned in there. The salaries, it would be good to see a potential fundraising coordinator in that salary to help, you know, with all the fundraising efforts, and potentially even maybe opening the museum on Saturdays and Sundays as opposed to just Saturdays. It could potentially work within that budget. And there's also a plan put out by Geo Insights that requires, I don't know if this falls under the trust or if it falls on the town, provide mitigation services. So any feedback on who's responsible for the mitigation services? That should be performed every 5 years, because I don't think to date that it's been done since since Plymouth Rubber has been converted to this site. And also, if there's any kind of fundraising outlet, that would be great to know, like what the 5-year capital plan would be for the trust, based on fundraising efforts. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. I will, as I committed to you, I didn't have time to get it all together for this meeting. I'll get that for you. But your point on the fundraising, a salary for fundraising, is good. But I want to make sure that we retained somebody for $20,000 last year that was paid for from our other fundraising dollars to help us with our capital campaign efforts, to kind of guide us in the right direction, and create contacts for us and develop and leverage some of their knowledge and resources. But we don't come to the town to ask for a budget appropriation for that. That to me should all be paid for out of our fundraising efforts, and so that shouldn't add to the cost. I mean, if we thought that adding another 20,000 through the town would generate double the amount of donations and increase our asset for the town quicker, I would consider that. But I think, we're trying to get the basic services paid for the and then the cost of a fundraiser should net against the fundraising gains. So that's how at least I've thought about it when we put together the budget. Let's see, the mitigation, again, I told you I don't know about that. I will check in, or Victor, do you have?
Yeah, let me address that one. I was on the select board, David, when that was undertaken. It was the very beginning. Geo Insight was essentially a peer review of the contamination experts provided by the developer, and that falls squarely within the select board's governance. We have nothing to do with that. Now I can say that because I'm no longer on the select board. But no, it doesn't have anything to do with us. Having reviewed our management agreement, I think you would agree there's nothing in there about that.
So if I can go through the last couple of pictures, because Dave, you had a question about the shed. And I just want to go through the last couple of pictures in our presentation, if I can. The first slide that was on was how it looked before. Now I was at the site the other day. You're seeing the little construction cans there. That's because the bathroom is scheduled to be, it's not scheduled to be delivered yet, but it is being manufactured. I would say mid-March. We're going to have the bathroom, and it's going to be just to the left of where those cans are. And on the very right-hand side, if this is, it looked beautiful when I got there. That's why I took a picture. To the right-hand side of the yellow barn is where the shed is. And if you go to the next, page, that's the highlight of this. And if you think about the presentation we did 2 years ago, we didn't have this beautiful deck on here now. And I do believe that this deck will allow us to run some corporate events at the barn. And now that we have the ability to get a one-day liquor permit, they could have a nice corporate outing in the barn, and we should be able to generate revenues from that going forward. And the shed is to the right of that. Now, and here's what the deck looks like if you stand on the deck. I mean, how beautiful is this as an asset to the town, huh? I mean, looks like you're at a country club. If you go to the next slide. I mean, it looks like you're at a country club, doesn't it? I mean, I mean, it's a really good location to have other things, or have town meetings. A couple of this. Here's the ironic thing: the CPA meeting that disallowed our pavilion, they held it in our barn. We should have charged them rent. All right, next slide.
I just also add one thing here with respect to the terrace. When we had the master plan undertaken in 2021, the consultants at the time estimated that this would be cost $750,000 to design and to create. It's a pretty substantial piece of exterior improvement. We got this for nothing. This was part of the negotiations that was entered into by the town under the select board's leadership, and that was donated by the developer. What we paid for was about $5,500, which is which will be reflected in architectural fees to essentially provide a peer review of what the developer was doing. So this is the kind of thing we're trying to do on behalf of the town, and we work with the select board with respect to this, is leveraging our position and trying to get value for the community, and that's what this is. And I'm happy to say, at the site inspired exhibit, which we had, some months ago, which was really, I think, quite beautiful, particularly since we had 50, 60 artists who came to this site for the sole purpose of creating art, which they could display in the barn. And it was all about the heritage site. We put tables out here for people to sit, and it was wonderful to see the community and our visitors actually enjoying this. It wasn't a corporate event. It wasn't a paid for event. It was for the community. And that's what we hope to also do with improvements such as this.
And Dave, you asked about the shed, last picture.
No, it wasn't the shed. It was the insurance charges going to the licensee.
Oh, so again, that's why we have insurance charges we have to have them as part of our budget, because we have to be fully insured to the town's required limits. And so that's why, and Randy worked with the same agent that insured when Randy was on our board, worked with the same agent that insures the town. And our package of insurance that covers us for all of the things so that the town doesn't get sued, that's what is costing $10,000. So, which is why that is included in our budget.
But
And
doesn't the
then the
licensing
last,
agreement say that's the responsibility of the licensee, meaning the trusts?
Yep.
Yes, it does, but I think what you're suggesting is not accurate, and that is, it is our responsibility to secure the insurance, just as it's our responsibility to obtain a cleaner for the interior. It doesn't say, and it was never intended to mean, that we would not be able to seek expense recovery from town at town meeting. That is not the case.
yeah, so it, I guess, you know, and you should think about it. I wouldn't want to be going out there asking people to donate to cover our insurances for a property that the town owns, but you know, that's a tough sell. The last thing is the shed. Usually when people put in a capital request, you know, like for a $20,000 or $30,000 shed, they would have put in like $40,000 and maxed this thing out. Well, we put in for the shed to have the shed delivered, and it didn't have anything in it. Didn't even have these shelves in it. Had the floor that we also had to negotiate as part of getting a floor to the base put on. The shed gets delivered, and we have this open space, and everything that we put in there is on the floor. We had to use some of our donated money to get some wood, and I built some shelves, and we're buying some bins to store our things, but we still need, you know, racks to hold our tables and chairs and things like that, so that we can bring things out for the community to use and bring it in. But at least we have a beautiful place now to store, our safe place to store all the things that we are buying as we're doing these events. We buy, you know, tents or wood or chairs or whatever we do, and we now have a place to store it. So that's what the shed looks like. So, and the town will now own that.
Any other questions from the Finance Committee? The one request I'd have, Alan, is if you're forwarding any additional information, I'd ask that you CC Randy on it so that it can get sent out to the full committee so that everyone has access to the same information. Would be very helpful.
Okay. Thank you for your time tonight. I know you guys have a yeoman's job ahead of you. I so much appreciate all the work that you put into this. I know I've been there and know this is your busy season. So thank you so much for your time. And any further follow-up questions, feel free to give me a ring. And as I said, I will probably meet with Dave and go through some other stuff as he requested. I'll send out the invite. Anybody wants to meet with me to go through some more details of the stuff, I'd be happy to.
Take care, everyone.
I do want to just say thank you, because I think that, you know, this property, while I think some of us may struggle with, you know, how we're going to pay for it, what's the future going to hold, how is the financial model going to be sustainable, there's no doubt that what we have there today is such a tremendous asset to our community. And it's been really great to see all of the community events. While you may not make money on them, I think it's incredibly important that our community has access to this property, can use it, can see it, enjoy it in a lot of different ways. So thank you. I know you've got a very hardworking board who are all volunteers, and please share our gratitude with them for the work that they do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care,
Have a
everyone.
good evening.
Bye-bye.
Excellent, thank you. So Randy is bringing us next to our discussion of the revenue forecast and what we're looking at in terms of fixed costs and estimates for cash capital. And so I'll turn this over to Randy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, there was an error on the agenda. I'm not covering the cash capital estimates at this point in time. I wanted to wait until the select board have made their recommendations before sharing that. So
good.
Not tonight. And then also on the fixed costs, I covered most of them in a prior meeting. I think there's maybe one or two that I would cover. With regards to the revenue estimate for FY25 general fund operating budgets, I see we're a half hour beyond schedule. As you and Amelia, the vice chair here, will recall, we spent an hour and 45 minutes yesterday reviewing this, so I'm assuming you would prefer that I do a Reader's Digest version, or I'm happy to do the full-fledged version. Your choice, Madam Chair.
I think if it's the will of the committee to do the Reader's Digest version, and then if there's any areas that committee members would like us to dive into in more detail, happy, we can do that.
Very good. So this is an annual process that the town undergoes, and there's a committee of nine folks. The school superintendent, the town administrator, the assistant superintendent of finance and operations from the schools, the chair and the vice chair of the finance committee, the town accountant, the director of assessing, the building commissioner, and myself. I think I've covered everybody on this committee of 9. Review the estimates and take a vote. And in short, the committee yesterday voted unanimously to support the revenue forecast you'll see before you here. There is a revenue forecasting policy, which I'm not going to read because it hasn't changed from the prior year. But if anybody has any questions on the policy, I'm happy to take them. But in essence, we're looking to be reasonable and prudent to develop a forecast that's going to be able to sustain services with recurring revenue funds, and also to live within the town's means in order to generate a free cash recharge that can be used to stabilize budgets and service levels. So at a high level, the top half of this page is the high level summary, total revenues estimated for FY25, the far right hand column. So $97.6 million in property tax revenue is estimated. 11.688 million was the governor's state aid proposal for the town of Canton, and local receipts is projected to be budgeted at $10,113,000, and then transfers from other funds $4,552,000, with a caveat that one of the transfers this year from ambulance receipts is actually for the replacement of an ambulance next year, so it's not going to his general fund budgets. So the actual, excluding that ambulance funding, the actual increase to forecast FY25 general fund revenues is 4.3%, and that's compared to 4.9% prior year. And you can see some much higher percentages in the years prior, and those higher percentages are largely driven by more generous state aid proposals. That's the high level. And so now each one of those 4 buckets, we have the detail here. And let's reduce this down so everybody can see. So this is the property tax revenue detail forecast. So net property tax revenue is estimated to increase by 3.9 million to 97.6 million. The levy limit is increasing by 2.5%, or 2.4 million. New growth tax is estimated at 873,000 by the assessing and building departments, which is a low ebb for the town. After a thorough review by the director of assessing and the building commissioner and vetted by the forecast committee, it was accepted that it looks like that FY25 is going to be a low ebb in new taxable growth, property tax growth for the town, which is also disappointing, but that just reflects the economic reality currently in the town. And then this allowable levy is reduced by the 0.32 health payment in lieu of taxes, because that property is no longer subject to property taxes, but we do have a 30-year payment in lieu of tax agreement, which is now reflected in local receipts. So that's why you see this deduct here, and that 30-year pilot agreement increases by 3% per year. There's also debt exclusions, 911,000. That's additive to this forecast, which is detailed on the next page. It's reduced because the debt exclusions are being amortized and being paid off, which is a good thing for the taxpayers. So that's how we get to the net of $97,596,491 in our estimated property tax revenue forecast for next year. And if anybody has any questions as we go, I'm happy to take them, or we can wait until I cover all the bases and we can go back. So anyway, Madam Chair, you'd like to handle it.
Any questions yet, or shall we wait for the end, folks? Okay, we're gonna, Dan?
Yeah, just a quick one, Randy, is that where would be the Chapter 90 money for the roads that we get from the states? Is that buried in here?
No, that's not general fund revenue. That's dedicated funding from the state. It is indeed state aid, but it's not what's referred to as sort of the standard cherry sheet state aid that goes directly to municipalities' general fund. It's a dedicated purpose, which is road and sidewalk improvements. So that's a separate amount that gets allocated to all of the communities.
And so where would that be in the summary? Is that
It
in the
wouldn't,
state aid,
because
or-
it's not general fund revenue. It is dedicated revenue for roads. It's a special purpose
Okay.
allocation.
Okay, all right, thank you.
No, good question. Any other questions on the property tax component? Right. So to support the debt exclusion amount, which is reflected in the prior page, so this details where we are with all of the town's current debt exclusions. Debt exclusion, of course, means the voters went to the polls and voted to increase their taxes to pay for various projects. So debt exclusion tax is decreasing by $372,000 due to amortization of existing bond issues. The library was paid off last year, and the high school will be paid off this year, as you can see in the schedule up above. By fiscal 28, gross excluded debt is scheduled to be 1.2 million less than it was in FY18. So over the 10 years, it would have dropped 1.2 million, and this will certainly free up some capacity for the contemplated Galvin Middle School project. So as you can see, we've got three remaining debt exclusions yet to pay off. That's the Hanson School addition, the Bolivar Pool, and St. Gerard's. And I have here the dates for when those would ultimately be paid off: 2037, 2040, and 2042. And given that the MSBA funded reimbursements have long since passed, there's very minimal relief to the town to fund to offset the debt exclusion tax, and it's basically from bond premiums that bond buyers paid to us that state requires us to amortize and apply to reduce the cost of taxpayers over the life of the bond. Any questions on debt exclusions? And again, this number 911-390 feeds back into the prior schedule. Okay. Next up is the second primary component of the town's recurring revenue funds in the general fund, and that's state aid. The governor's proposed budget, released on January 25th, is a 1.4% increase, or 6% less than the prior year, which obviously is very disappointing. Education aid is up only $71,400, or 0.8%. General government aid is up $86,400, or 3.1%. So the total state aid proposal reflects a $157,800 increase, or again 1.4%. And if you look at the subtotal percentages under the education line, third way down the page, you'll see that in 23 and 24, we had some pretty substantial increases in education aid: 19.8%, 8.7% this year, and now it's less than a percentage. And the unrestricted general government aid, which is referred to as the lottery aid, is much smaller. It's a fraction of Chapter 78, and even though it had a 3% increase, it's the tail wagging the dog, so it's not very significant. So this is disappointing and really puts some downward pressure on what's available to fund budgets this year. And I'm sure obvious question would be, well, that's the governor's proposal on January 25th. the legislature takes the next 5 months to finalize the budget. So is this likely to change? And the short answer is no, not in time before the town has to put its budgets to bed. As this committee well knows, that within the next 2 months, the budget recommendations of this committee would be finalized and it will be documented in your finance report and sent to the publisher to be printed and distributed to the voters. So I'm expecting no movement on this proposal over the next 2 months. Might there be movement before the whole legislative process plays out by the end of June, beginning of July? Maybe, but it won't be in time for the town to incorporate any significant change into the forecast. Again, and that's what's most disappointing, because the prior governor, these last 2 years in his first term, did not propose such a de minimis increase to municipalities for state aid. And the majority of the school districts in the state only received the minimum increase in their Chapter 70 education aid of $30 per student. And that includes the town of Canton as well. That's state aid. Questions on state aid? Okay. Next up is local receipts. These are all of the other buckets of funds that are not property taxes. It's not state aid and not transfers from other funds. Excise taxes and fees and alcohol licenses and fines and forfeits, interest income, etc. So the local receipts budget is estimated to increase by $863,000 or 9.3%. So it's a healthy percentage increase for next year. The gross receipts are estimated to increase by $1.35 million or 12.5%. I'll explain the difference between the gross receipts and the budget receipts in a moment. So the free cash recharge is targeted at $1.5 million, consistent with plan. So in essence, what we do is we look to forecast what we truly believe the gross amounts, the gross local receipts would be or will be collected, without hedging, without being conservative. What is the gross amount that we're expecting? And so that $12.1 million is our estimate of what we're expecting. And so then what the town has done historically is reduce that amount by approximately $1.5 million to recharge free cash. That's the living within the town's means component. You don't do that with the taxes. You don't do that with the state aid. All of that is fully committed. This is where you hedge and try to live within the town's means to recharge free cash, to guard against other fluctuations where the town's reserves would be called in to assist. So what you're seeing down here is you're seeing the $12,113,000, the fully loaded gross amount that we're expecting in FY25, 12.5%. The budget of $10,113,000, which is $2 million less. And you're saying, well, that's not $1.5 million less, that's $2 million less. Why is that? So what we've done is we've actually reduced the commitment to the budget by an additional $500,000 related to investment earnings in anticipation of eventual reduced earnings. Why would we do that? Let me explain. So interest income is highly variable. So you'll see in fiscal 21 and 22, we earned in the range of $160,000. And then in FY23, at the beginning of FY23, rates started to rise, as we all know, and they started to rise at the beginning of the fiscal year. So it was a very good year for the town in fiscal 23 on this line item, as we earned over $1.5 million. And the town was very aggressive. My office, the treasurer's office, in maximizing returns, with our banks. We have to have a diversified portfolio of banks, and we made sure that we were getting the best possible rates, from all of them, pushing them for higher rates or swapping out a bank, adding a bank, to make sure that we were getting the best that we possibly could from the taxpayers' dollars. So this year in FY24, we're actually on track to hit 2 million. So our estimate was 600,000 because when we put this budget to bed a year ago, it was unclear where rates were going. The rates were actually going to escalate dramatically from less than 1% to the 4.5% to 5.5% range that we're in right now. But we're on track to receive $2 million this year. And so why not budget that $2 million in FY25? That's pretty simple. What's playing out here with interest income is a potential trap for municipalities. If many of you recall, in 2008, when the economy collapsed due to the mortgage-backed industry scandal, that was fiscal 29 for all of us in government. Capital gains tax earnings for the state practically disappeared. But it had been booming for a decade before that. And the state never hedged on how much they committed to their budgets. So they learned the hard way in 29 that they had over-relied on capital gains tax. And that's why they were what were called 9C cuts in 2009 and dramatically reduced state aid budgets for the next couple of years until the economy started to recover. And so what the state did in response to that is they reevaluated their approach to incorporating capital gains estimated earnings into their revenue forecasts. They said, we're not going to commit all of our capital gains estimates. We're going to go down to a baseline so that we don't get caught short like they did badly in 2009 and thereafter. So this is a page out of that book, is to protect the town from being over-reliant on interest income when it is likely, based on everything that we're hearing and reading today about where the Fed is likely poised to be over the next year. So right now, our average earnings from our banks, where we have general fund earnings, is about 4.5%. I'm estimated that will probably be down to about 3.5% by the end of fiscal 25. Maybe it won't change. Maybe it'll go higher. Maybe it'll go lower. But based on everything we're seeing and hearing, I think the expectation is that it will slowly go down. And so, therefore, the $2 million that we're going to receive today, or in this fiscal year, is not realistic to assume they're going to receive that in the next fiscal year. So as a result, the Revenue Committee agreed that it didn't make sense to go forward with this high watermark that we're going to achieve this year and reduce that by $500,000 so we wouldn't overcommit. So that brings us to the $10,113,000, which is still an $863,000 increase from local receipts to general fund budgets, or a 9.3% increase. So there's one other point here that I believe bears commenting on, and find my note. That is, if you look at, I have my note, I'm going to do this from memory. If you look at fiscal 23 and you look at the high watermark that we had for local receipts, 13.1 million. Excuse me. And you look at the gross estimate for FY25 at $1 million less than that. You would ask, well, that seems really conservative, but it's not, because there are four primary things that impacted FY23, that some of which will not recur. Some likely will, and we've dramatically increased the forecast to incorporate that, like motor vehicle excise tax. So motor vehicle excise tax was budgeted about $390,000 less than what it came in at in FY23. So rather than go with a more conservative estimate like we typically do, for this year was 4.85 million. The consensus was to go with something right about the average at $5 million. So we're reflecting, what has been the average to not underestimate there. Again, on interest income, rather than go with something that was less than $1 million for this year, and it was only $150,000 budgeted in FY23, we're being more realistic in that $1.5 million is a good number based on everything we're hearing for FY25. So that has dramatically increased. We've dramatically adjusted and increased to reflect that. If you look at permits, we typically go with $1.2 million for as our gross estimated number for permits. But looking at the average, we're seeing the average is about 1.4 million. It fluctuates up and down from that. But rather than going about $250,000 less than the average, we're going at the average, like with excise tax. So bringing that up to sort of a fully loaded, what we're really expecting, no hedge. And then the last item that's interesting is other miscellaneous revenue. Again, I'm looking at FY23, $502,000. So there are about 3 or 4 substantial items within that will not recur. One is we have the town's treasury had loaned the Affordable Housing Trust $217,000 to purchase a property that was going to be taken off the protected affordable housing list unless the town bought it and sold it, which it did. Unfortunately, the loan that the town made to purchase that property, we didn't sell it by the end of the fiscal year. So it was a deduct to our free cash, but it did come back to us within the first month of fiscal 23, and that was $217,000. So that's not going to recur. Another thing that happened is we have about $140,000 in opioid receipts that we've started to receive in FY23. We had about 22,000 in FY22, and those funds are not now. They technically, according to the DOR, were general fund receipts. Had to go to the general fund here on this local receipts line and come out as free cash, but not to be spent on anything until they were reappropriated towards opioid purposes or a special purpose. So the legislature has finally fixed that, and now at the Maytown meeting, we'll be putting forward the article that fixes that, which allows the town to appropriate from free cash all the opioid funds the town has received to put it into a special revenue fund that can be used specifically for opioid prevention related purposes. So there's approximately $130,000 that came in there that is not a general fund, not available for general fund purposes, and won't be going forward. We will receive more money, more monies like that, similar in the outgoing years, but they will be now dedicated directly to the special revenue fund. Any future opioid funds the town receives will, after we pass this article at the Maytown meeting, will be able to be directly deposited into the special revenue fund, not the general fund, so it won't distort what we're seeing here on our local receipts. And then the other oddity that inflated this number was the Blue Hills Regional School was required, by their regulations to return to all of the participants in Blue Hills Regional and overachieve, I'll call it, that they had in their stabilization account. So there was $38,000 that came back to the town as a result of that, and that's in that number. So those are one-time items that was appeared to be a nice overachieve in FY23, but those aren't going to recur, and so it didn't make sense to adjust those. But either way, I can say to the committee and the community that I believe, and the revenue committee believes, that this local receipts forecast is probably as aggressive as it makes sense to be for the town without being too aggressive and putting the community's recurring revenue stream at risk. So I think the town is the revenue committee is being as reliant as we reasonably can be on these funds here. Again, the goal is for this funding source to grow, at a reasonable rate in order to fund general fund budgets. I'm sure there may be some questions here, so I'm going to pause and ask for any questions on local receipts.
I'm just gonna maybe add a comment, really feel free to, because you joined us, you were at that meeting as well. Having been at part of this process in the past, there were times that it was a much more challenging process because the estimates were always very conservative. And there are times you would sit there and say, but our residents are expecting services from us. We need to have the right balance between, sort of aggressiveness and risk, and at the same time, not overcommitting on these revenues. But I think it went very smoothly yesterday because I think as you walked through and we heard from others in the room who are involved in the revenue discussion, that you're pushing the envelope probably as far as is appropriate. We have to have a balanced budget and wanting to maximize our revenues for sure, but not overextend ourselves. And it felt, I think, to the revenue committee like the work you presented us this evening hit that mark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to take any other comments or questions on local receipts. And of course, we can come back to it. I have one more slide to go.
Amelia?
I just wanted to agree with you, Cindy, regarding the real good thought and both balance, as you said, between kind of the want to be aggressive in our projection, but also to be prudent and not put the town in a position that it may not meet what our projections are. So I just wanted to also thank Randy for all of the work he did to put this together.
Thank you, Amelia.
Any other questions or comments before we move on to, I think, your last page here, Randy? Dave's got a question. Yeah.
Question in regards to local receipts. Does that include any projections for the addition of Topgolf?
Yes, the meals tax component, and I'm glad you brought that one up because I actually didn't speak to that line. So second line from the top, other excise, is the hotel and meals tax amounts. So just to look at a little history, in FY21, middle of COVID, that number dropped. FY22 started to rebound nicely. And FY23, some businesses, started to. I know we lost some restaurants, but then we had some other restaurants, within hotels, etc. That came back, and the meals tax came back very, very strong. $1,023,000 in FY23. So in FY24, we looked at the trajectory, and to Cindy's point, it wasn't as aggressive as we could possibly be for this year at 900,000, but it's currently trending closer to the $1,073,000 that we're projecting for FY25 based on the first two quarters that have come in compared to last year. So we are fully committed in this forecast, meaning again unhedged on what we truly believe should come in on meals and actually hotels as well. Obviously, the other major component related to Topgolf revenue for the town is property tax, and that is fully loaded into the property tax revenue projection.
Okay, great. Thank you. I saw that on the assessor's card that, all that extra tax revenue for Topgolf was there. But one question, if I may, in regards to commercial assessments, according to the tax recap, there's commercial assessments only rose 5%, while residential is going up 8%. 8.5%. In my opinion, I just feel like some of these commercial assessments are way too low. The town could be missing out on millions of dollars in additional revenue. And is there a chance that the town could potentially bring in an additional outside consultant just to specialize in commercial assessments to make sure our values are on the mark? A consultant different than what we're currently using?
Good question, Dave. So in essence, every town in the state does have an outside consultant reviewing all of the assessments that are made across the state on property tax. And that is the State Bureau of Local Assessment. In order to get your values certified, including new growth, is incredibly rigorous process and is become incredibly more rigorous over the 20 years to meet their standards, to ensure that everything is valued equivalently or equally across the board. So the state performs that function. So it's not necessary for the town to spend more money or any other town to spend more money to get a second opinion on commercial. That function is being performed.
So the state does that function?
Yeah, every year, and they've been doing it forever. They come out with
verify what our current assessor consultant gives them?
Well, ultimately it's the director of assessing and the board of assessors who put forward the values. They receive assistance from the commercial consultant, but ultimately it's the assessing department's work that gets put forward, and the state reviews that rigorously. And then every 2 years, they come out with what's called equalized valuations for every community to sort of make adjustments for where a community falls within commonized property values across the state. So they've been doing that for quite some time. And in my prior life, 15 years, I did have assessing under me in the finance department. I don't have that here in Canton. It's separate. But I will tell you that over those 15 years, it became increasingly more rigorous to pass muster with the Bureau of Local Assessment to get them to certify your values.
Okay, thank you for that information.
Right, thank you, Dad. Appreciate the question. So no other questions on local receipts at this time. I'll go to the next slide, which is transfers. So these are funds that exist within the town that feed into the budgetary process. So transfers to the general fund are recommended to increase by $752,000, but with just a net of a $220,000 increase for operating budgets. And the reason for that is you'll see in red in the FY25 column, $532,000 from ambulance receipts reserved, which is funds that our ambulance services receive from the transportation and work that they do, and the insurance funding that they get for that work. That $532,000 from that fund will be dedicated in the capital budget for an ambulance replacement. However, that's always been reflected as part of the transfers, the transfers funding motion one within the budget article in the warrant. So, but that's really to fund capital, not operating. So even though there's a greater commitment from ambulance, it's going to capital. So it doesn't feed operating budgets. $170,000 increase from solar revenues. And that's based on two components there, where we receive a payment in lieu of tax amount from the property, the equipment owner there, which is approximately $385,000, and then the net that the additional amounts that the town gets is related to net metering credits. So the difference between what we're paid for the electricity that's generated and what we have to pay back to our solar partner based on the agreement that was struck several years ago. And that net metering credit value changes annually, or actually biannually, based on the rates that the Department of Public Utilities sets. So we've had some years where it's been next to nothing, the net. And we've had other years, where it's been substantial, like in FY 23. So looking at where the rates are currently trending for this year, we actually just absorbed a 19% reduction in the rates that the DPU set for this year in their latest adjustment. So carrying that trend forward, I've estimated that we should see about $170,000 more than we've estimated for this year. And then you've got chargebacks, which relates to the enterprise fund, sewer, water, and rink, which they are assessed for administrative overhead associated, with the departments, as well as benefit costs associated with their employees. So, and that's by formula, and that's an $103,000 increase from those chargebacks to those enterprises. $34,000 increase in ambulance receipts for operating expenses, because we like to increase the operating commitment by 3% annually. And then de minimis $10,000 increase from Green Lodge parking fees. As you recall, in COVID, people stopped taking full advantage of going into work, because they weren't going into work. So our fund was drying up, so we had to reduce that from 70,000 to 35,000. It's the middle of the page. And then this past year was still drying up. So we had to drop it down again because it was only going to last for like another 3 or 4 years, but it seems like it's starting to tick up again. So we're able to add another 10,000 to that. And then there's a $95,000 reduction in ambulance debt service requirement. We try to move away from paying for ambulance replacements with debt, but we have to do that when we don't have enough to pay cash. Next year we'll have enough to pay cash, but so that $95,000 reduction isn't really helping anything, because that was just going to go to pay debt service. So that's where we land at $4,552,000 for our transfer from other funds estimates. Oh, and I have to say, I'm pleased to see that the way that the school food service program is operating now, they were able to recommit this year and next year back to their prior funding levels. Obviously, during COVID, the funding source had dried up. One other important item on this page, which I'm going to correlate to one item on the next page, which is the fixed costs. So the Plymouth Rubber DIF fund. So we now have a bond that we're paying that for the infrastructure that the town purchased from the developer, $6.3 million. So we have a 20-year bond, including the interest. It's about $9.2 million. This year's debt service payment was the first one, $571,000. Next year is approximately the same amount. And so that is funded from monies that the property tax revenues that the town is receiving from all of the properties on the Revere site, based on a formula that's part of the DIF agreement, a District Improvement Fund agreement struck in 2015, whereby via formula, the gross revenues, new tax revenues from that site, less certain amount, the net of that has to be deposited into this sinking fund until the entirety of the debt service payments is fully funded. So we have to continue to do that until we achieve $9.2 million. So I believe at our last meeting, I shared with you the detailed schedule on how that goes, and we'll have to continue to do that by my estimates until 2029, which is when we should have achieved the full $9.2 million. I want to correlate that to one number here on the fixed cost schedule, which I reviewed most of this with you in a prior meeting, but now I want to connect the dots between the transfer from funds that are sitting in this DIF sinking fund to down 3/4 down the page of Department 116, Plymouth Rubber DIF transfer. So in FY25, the amount that's required to deposit into the DIF sinking fund is $1,071,000, and that's by formula the diff agreement formula that was struck again back in 2015. That's a pretty significant increase over the current year. It's actually 548,000. So you need to think about it in this way. So we're receiving, gross tax receipts from the Revere site. And in FY25, the estimate is 1.3 million. But because due to the formula, 1,071,000 of that has to be tucked away into the sinking fund. So there's only just over $200,000 from all of the new property tax revenue on the Revere site that's actually going to fund general fund budget. So, so the way to think about this is we see a nice lift in property tax revenue, when we looked at the property tax page, but we have to carve off over $1 million of that next year just to go into this sinking fund. So again, that's why it's important to understand that that will continue until approximately FY 29 when we're fully funded on that sinking fund. So a little painful for next year. It would have been great to see that all flow to the general fund, but that was the arrangement that was made in order to fund all of that infrastructure. And looking back on it, $6.3 million is a pretty good deal. 8 years later, in what the cost of that was and the value that the town got. But those are the hard facts on the diff dynamics. And I'm happy to take any questions on that topic if anybody has any. Dan.
So you said we got about 1.2 million of property tax revenue from the condos, if you will, at Revere.
About
we have to
1.3.
pay, yeah, but then we have to pay 1.2 for the agreement that we have. So what's that other 500,000?
In FY24?
Yeah, well, it's 570,000. It's that
Okay, you're going back to the, okay, yeah, let me explain. Good question. So back in the transfer schedule here, this is where the where's our diff fund?
116.
Yeah, 160. Yeah, here we go. Yep. So this 500 in FY24, the 570,000 and approximately the same amount in FY25, that equates to the debt service cost that we have in each of those 2 years to pay the debt service on the bond that we had to take out to pay the developer the $6.3 million for that infrastructure. So we have a 20-year bond to pay that. So this is pulling the funds, the $570,000 from the sinking fund where that $1 million is going to go next year. We have to pull those funds from the sinking fund in order to transfer it to pay the debt service. So in essence, we're taking tax revenues from the Revere properties, putting it into a sinking fund, but then we have to budget to pay the debt service, and the funding for that debt service is coming from the sinking fund. So here we're paying for the debt service, the 570,000 this year and next year, and here is where we're taking the funds out of property taxes to put away into the sinking fund. $523,000 this year, $1,071,000 next year. Again, based on the formula that was in the agreement in 2015.
Yeah, I'll probably have to talk to you about that offline. It's a little fuzzy, but the net impact on
It
the
is.
town is about 200,000. Is that?
I'm
that
sorry,
fair?
Dan.
So the net impact on the town is that we gain about 200,000.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
So that's significant, and I think it's important for this committee to understand that yes, the Revere site is generating some nice new tax revenues, but we have to pay for the infrastructure that we committed to and that we've now borrowed for, and that's the funding source to do that. That is the essence of the district improvement funding concept, the DIF concept.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on the DIF concept? If not, I just have one last component. This is a schedule I developed last year just to provide some transparency on ambulance receipts, which is a material component to the town's revenue stream. Looking at ambulance receipts, appropriations have to be available at the time of appropriation. So you have to have the cash on hand at town meeting. So this appropriation view at the top reflects the estimated amount of ambulance receipts available at the time of appropriation. The fiscal year view reflects the unadjusted actual and projected performance of the fund in the fiscal year periods. So the growth rate in ambulance receipts been choppy over the last 10 years. Sometimes it's negative, sometimes it's positive, but it's got a nice, currently 7.25% compound average growth rate over the last 10 years. You don't know what's going to happen year to year, so we project 2.5%. So if we look at FY25, you'll see that we're estimating we'll have $2.5 million in the fund by town meeting, and that we're committing $1,170,000 to the operating budget, $532,000 again pay cash for the ambulance, $86,200 for a scheduled debt service. So a commitment from this fund, FY25 of $1,788,000, leaving a balance at the end of FY25 of $733,000. And again, FY26, look, there's another ambulance that's slated to be put forward as a capital request. The next one currently isn't slated until FY29. So once we get past FY26 and see that, this is sustainable, this might be an opportunity to fund potentially other capital items, for the community and take some of the burden off the capital. But I just wanted to spotlight what goes on with this fund, just so everybody had a clear view of it. Dave.
Thank you. So are the uncollectibles from the auditor's report noted on this spreadsheet?
No, this is just pure cash. This is the actual cash that the town receives and the appropriations made from that at town meeting.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
We'll get to that. I believe we'll get to that question later in the agenda.
Okay. Thank you.
So to recap, going back to the summary page. So at the top of the page here, this all equates to a revenue forecast of $123,940,083. And this is the amount that the Revenue Forecast Committee voted unanimously 9-0 to support. So it's here before you tonight to see if you'd like to take a vote to support that or think about it, come back to the next meeting. I'll let you know in prior, it's at obviously the committee's prerogative to do as you see fit. In prior years, we've come right from the Revenue Forecast meeting, the Finance Committee meeting, looking for a vote. And then in your next meeting, we typically go to looking at setting budgetary targets, but we have to set the revenue forecast before we can do that.
Thank you for your thorough review. I don't know if it was Reader's Digest version, but
Sorry.
No, but it's important. We need to understand how we get to that number if we're going to vote on it. So I want to see if it's the will of the committee to take a vote this evening or whether you want to hold till next week. I'm getting thumbs up here. Okay, so let's go ahead and do we have a motion to accept the revenue target?
Move to accept the revenue target for fiscal year 25 of $123,940,083.
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, Randy, can you call the vote for us?
Yes, Madam Chair. Rookie,
Aye.
Kristen,
Aye.
Tim,
Aye.
Karen,
Aye. Aye.
Dan.
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
Emilio,
Aye.
and Cindy.
Aye.
Unanimous, 800, Madam Chair. Thank you all.
Very good. I think maybe if folks don't mind, I might suggest we go a little out of order and maybe do the follow-up to the auditor's report, just because it feeds right into Dave's question about ambulance receipts. And I'll just kind of give a little bit of a context for this. Thank you. You have written responses for us. At our meeting a couple of meetings ago, we had the auditors with us, and Randy was under the weather and not able to attend. There were a couple of questions that came up, and so I want to note that this isn't questions, as if necessarily problems, but more discussion items that came up that we really wanted to address, Randy, when you were with us. So to get some feedback. Some of them we may be able to skip, like discussions about the state budget, because we just spent time on that. But two of the questions that were came up had to do with collection of receipts. And one of them was in the area of the ambulance receipts, and then the other had to do with police details, where there seemed to be some delays in collection of receipts and some challenges there. So I didn't go in order of collections are there. So I'll turn it over to you, Randy, to maybe speak to this.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate the questions from the committee. So with regards to these receivables and the question about, in essence, uncollectibles. So certain receivables like these, police details, ambulance receipts, and I would put motor vehicle excise into this category as well, are rarely fully collected for many reasons. And we typically carry the gross amount on our books and then annually write down stale balances for audit purposes, not write off, but write down. So in the presentation of our financial statements, to reflect what we believe is truly collectible, which is an accepted standard practice. We continue to carry some of those balances because some payments do trickle in, like on motor vehicle excise tax. Yes, on police details, we have a lot of utility companies, but on ambulance receipts, those amounts are typically significantly undercollected, not because of the lack of effort. The town has a collection agency, Coastal, who we contract with to manage that, and they get paid a percentage to collect that, 4%. And they are aggressive. They go after every insurance company, every individual, and they will continue to do that on every one of these receivables until they recommend that, hey, it's costing more than it makes any sense to continue to try to collect these balances. So then there's an official process where the fire chief then takes the recommendation from the collection company, goes to the select board, and asks them to actually officially write off certain amounts of the ambulance receipts receivables. And again, it's every ambulance service charges a particular rate, and insurance companies don't necessarily pay the full rate, but we still we still charge for what is standard practice. So ambulance receipts do get written down typically annually by the select board process. On the police detail receipts, again, having a significant experience with this myself in my prior life, in Foxborough, police detail receipts was a cottage industry. Back then it was like $3 million a year. And so we also had, some, good sized balances or vendors that were slow payers, many of which we could be very aggressive with because of bylaws that the town had, like you can't open for business unless you pay, because you need a police detail. And in some cases, like in this town, smaller businesses go out of business and there's no way to collect from them. But if you look at the detail and the balances that the police detail uncollected balances are where we ended the year. It's mostly related to utility companies who are particularly slow payers, but there are some balances that are pretty stale. And I look to the police chief to recommend that that it's because of reasonable circumstances, like the business is gone under, there's nobody at the business, so you can write them up. But it's a standard practice. We even had significant collection challenges with the craft organization, which was they were the primary police detail employer in the town for a variety of reasons, which I won't get into. So we would get strung out for many months for disagreements on a variety of different things, and ultimately settle and resolve. So it's not unstandard for that to happen. And then motor vehicle excise, we typically don't write off all the lagging years, because it's a pretty strong enforcement condition that we have, where somebody doesn't pay the motor vehicle excise tax in the state, they're flagged at the registry and they can't renew their license. Even if they move out of state, some states, will carry that over. So we do write them down, something that's really stale, but we don't always write everything off.
Thank you. Can we talk, it looks like one of the concerns was whether we were on target. Actually, let me pause. Dave, go back to, did you have a question on that one?
Yes, thank you. So Cindy, so I do have a question or a couple of comments in regards to the police details. So I did some additional research on those details. I pulled some of the records. Some of the customers, we'll call them, on that list have the biggest signs that say we support the police, which means technically they're defunding the police by not paying their bills. So I got some corresponding emails from the admin at the police station, and it seems like there's an issue where the subcontractor is putting it all back on the utility company owes it, or they're all playing games like this town owes it, we don't owe it. So I have requested some onboarding documents, engagement documents, or even surety bonds that could help collect these receipts. None of those exist. So it seems like a process that needs a lot of improvement. And there's a little bit of reason for concern there, because that amount, which is about $100,000, could potentially fund a new police officer. And the police officers are getting paid, but the town, is getting shortchanged by a lot of these companies by not paying their detail bills. So I think that needs to be reviewed, and process should be reviewed, with the police chief and the select board going forward to help the issue with those uncollectibles. And then the question in regard to the ambulance receipts, is it just like an insurance adjustment or accounting?
It's primarily an insurance adjustment, kind of like when we all go to our healthcare providers, and the healthcare provider says, this service, the gross charge is $1,000. They submit it to insurance, and insurance says, well, we'll pay you $400 to the provider. We're not going to pay you $1,000. So it's more along those lines. But the collection agency that we have, Coastal, is pretty aggressive. They go after every pocket. Oftentimes you hear like, well, what other insurances do you have? And in some cases, they'll go directly to the individuals who receive the service to ask them to pay if that's reasonable and customary. So it's a typical insurance markdown on what's being billed.
So it's almost like a negotiated rate type issue that's not getting accounted for in the accounting system, it sounds like, right?
Well, it's being billed, and it's not like right, and it's not like the collection agency doesn't ever collect 100% of what's being billed. It all depends on the types of services that are being billed for and the insurance coverage that's associated with it. As you can imagine, there are many different insurances that are associated. It could be auto insurance, could be, homeowners, medical, et cetera. So it's a tricky little labyrinth of insurance, which is why you have a collection agency to manage that, because they know how to pursue all of the insurance avenues until they've exhausted them all, including dunning letters, et cetera.
To me, that just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, the way, we're saying where there's $1 million in uncollectibles, but it's potentially a write-off from the insurance company or whatnot, but it shouldn't be it doesn't seem like it should be on the books the way it is. If it's really a write-down for negotiated rates, the town, do they negotiate rates with different insurance carriers for their ambulance service, or do we just say it's $500 ride?
No, the town has set rates. So then they run up against, the various insurances that the collection agency has to collect from, and the arrangements that they have with the with the various various companies. So it's very similar to your own personal medical care expense experience. $1,000 going to get billed for this particular procedure by a provider, but the insurance company says we'll pay $400. And then the provider says, all right, we'll take the $400, and then we'll look for another $200 from the consumer of the service. So it's a labyrinth. This whole insurance collection area, particularly on the medical side.
Well, in regards to the police side, are we issuing contracts to these companies we're performing the service for by offering the protection that they need?
I don't manage the police detail process, so that's really a question for for the police department and the police chief.
And I did ask that, to the town clerk, and she said there is no engagement documents, no onboarding documents. So it seems like a flawed process that our town's missing out on $100,000 that could be used for many other things. So that's something that, probably should be run up to the select board meeting to have them review this, because they're the authority of the police, right? And they have the ultimate say on what should be done, right? Or is it in the finance department's realm?
Well, I guess we all share a role on it. I mean, I do speak to the chief about it. When I'm monitoring the balances, and if I see the balance rise to a particular level, I say, there needs to be a greater collection effort here so we can bring this balance down. And this past year, police chief and her administrator, they did a phenomenal job in bringing down a balance. I think we peaked at somewhere around $500,000, and where we landed was somewhere around 90,000, which I believe is close to the amount that ultimately needs to be written off because it's been carried for so long.
But out of that 90,000, I think like Eversource owes like 50 or 60,000 of it off the top of my head.
Yeah, and that goes back to my point that the utility companies are extremely slow payers. And because of some of the circumstances that you actually raised, the scarecrow approach about, who's really responsible for paying here. So that's a game, within itself to try to get payment.
So I want to just take a pause here, because I'm glad you brought this up. I think it's important that we're looking at all of the areas where our town can be making sure we're capturing revenue. And it sounds to me, Randy, like you have done some work with the police department around this issue. As you said, you look at them, and it seems like it might be a good topic to go before the town administrator, perhaps, to look at whether or not all of the proper procedures are in place to make sure that we're running the operation in the most effective manner. I think your point there, Dave, is well taken. That, and so I think that might actually initially maybe be something, Randy, to bring forward to the town administrator to see where that might lie. Obviously, if it needs to go further than that to the select board, then it could. But
I actually, this is a great point, Madam Chair and Dave. I have raised this, with the town administrator, and I know he has ops meetings with public safety, and I know this is a topic, as well. So it's not something that that people don't pay attention to. I think best efforts are being made in the department, but again, I can tell you, based on my experience, Canton is no different than other communities. I think Canton does pretty well. I was very impressed with what the police department did this year on its collection efforts.
So I'd like to keep us moving because we're almost at 9 o'clock and we have a number of agenda items that we have yet to get to. I think on the list from the follow-up items on the audit, I mean, maybe just comment quickly. I know, Randy, we had questions about where we were with ARPA. We're on target there in terms of deadlines. I know the other discussion was about a network security audit, and your response makes a lot of sense, which is that's not something we can necessarily discuss publicly. Is something that you hear in other venues as well, because what we're doing for security isn't something we necessarily want to broadcast.
And Madam Chair, on that one, I will say that Mr. Jutras, our IT manager, has offered to discuss if there truly are, significant concerns by this committee on the efforts that are being made there, that he's happy to have that discussion with this committee, but in executive session, obviously, to protect the town.
Yeah.
So if that's something you'd like to do, just let me know.
And I think that only came up because it was an issue the town should be having a network security audit, and we didn't know where we stood on that. So that was where this came from. I think the only other one here, maybe that is important for us to get to this evening is the assessor's overlay.
Sure. So I don't mean to flip with my response, but this one is just amusing to me. This is one of those what I call half dozen of one, six of the other. Again, backing up, it was discussed that the auditors said that that the overlay should be reduced. I completely disagree with that. I've had discussion with the auditors on that. They agree with me. So the overlay is part of the town's reserves. It's not separate. So just like stabilization is part of the town's reserve, there is zero issue of keeping the town's primary reserves in three buckets: overlay, stabilization, undesignated fund balance, as it had for years. So in the schedule that I share with this committee and others, you'll see that presentation. You'll see 3 columns, then adding up to the total reserve balance, and it's overlay, stabilization, undesignated fund balance. So all of that makes up the town's reserves, which currently stand at over 20%. So overlay is not out of the equation. Overlay is required by the state in order to cover any abatements, and exemptions that we have. So it's an appropriate place to have reserve, just like stabilization is an appropriate place to have reserve, and it's tappable. I have a great relationship with the Board of Assessors, and if for some reason we needed to go directly to that part of our reserves, we absolutely could. And then, as you know, folks on this committee know better than I that the Board of Assessors has released overlay funds to fund, I believe, part of the Bolivar Pool project. So it's part of the reserves. Again, the final note is, as I said, I saw this, in their comment, the auditor's comments, and I spoke with the partner Tony, and he's, he was willing to pull the comment because he didn't disagree with my point, because obviously he's been seeing it for years and he knows that this is part of our reserves. But I said, no, don't pull it. I said, because the former town accountant, who I have the deepest respect for, has an alternate understanding of this, and I believe has always taken the position that there shouldn't be so much in the overlay. There should be an undesignated fund balance. And she's entitled to that opinion, and there's nothing wrong with that opinion. It's just that, again, it's half dozen of one, six of the other. It's part of the reserves. So I didn't want to, step on the town accountant's toes and say, oh yeah, pull it. I wanted it to be, I wanted it to, the daylight on this, so I could have this exact conversation with you.
Thank you, Randy. I appreciate the clarification. It's been a couple of weeks since we had the audit discussion, but there were those outstanding loose ends. The next thing on our agenda, we have 2 items remaining. One of them is to discuss the annual town meeting warrant, in particular, the 2 warrant articles for Finance Committee and Government Modernization. And then the other agenda item is an update regarding the Procurement Committee for the Police Department audit. I would like, with the committee's, if the committee is so inclined, to suggest that we defer the town meeting warrant discussion until our next meeting. I would like to give a homework assignment if I could, and that would be for folks to dig into the bylaws. And before we have this discussion at our next meeting, to spend some time really looking at the bylaw, particularly as it pertains to the potential implications for the government modernization study. And I'll just briefly comment on why. Town Council recommended that this effort get broken out, and we'll talk about this in more detail next meeting, into a couple of efforts, and that we this next year only do a bylaw modernization study committee, and then in subsequent years would be a review of the zoning bylaw, and then another point, review of governance. I think in order for our committee to consider the town council's recommendation on this, it would be important to really dig into the bylaw, not necessarily the zoning components, but the others, and really spend some time looking at that and considering where we see particularly the intersection between sort of the portions of the bylaw that maybe are more about how the town, I'll say how town hall operates. There's a lot in there about who reports to whom and those kinds of things, but there are also things in there about town meeting and about other areas that I think fall within the topic, at least in my lens, of governance. So I think that as a committee, we'll be better prepared for this discussion if folks do some homework ahead of time and dig into the bylaw. So if that's okay with folks, I know we have a number of people who've joined our meeting today, in particular because of their interest in the update on the Procurement Committee. We're at 9 o'clock, and I want to respect the committee's time. So my recommendation, if it's okay with the committee, is that we postpone this item till next week, and that we move on to the update on the Procurement Committee for the Police Department. Is that, if I could just get a thumbs up or a will of the committee, whether that's okay? All right, very good. So with that, we will move to the 8:15 agenda item for an update regarding the Procurement Committee. Before we start this, I want to make a couple of comments. First and foremost, I think it is important for us to keep in mind that as much as we are interested in this topic, we do not have any authority or jurisdiction as a finance committee. And so tonight, what I think we're here to do is get an update from our finance director on the status of the committee, for us to have some discussion as a finance committee about any reactions or comments or feedback folks have on that. And then we will turn to some of the folks who've joined us for this evening's meeting, who I suspect may want to make comments. I am going to ask that when you make comments, both that you provide your name, because we have a few places where there's not names on the Zoom, and that you also keep your comments reasonably brief. We don't have a formal time limit here, but we also want to be respectful, and that you also, that we not repeat the same comments. So certainly we welcome people if they have things to add that haven't already been said. We welcome that, and I can speak for myself that I am here to listen. Like I said, we don't have authority here to do anything, to make changes or do anything different, but we certainly want to listen and understand the concerns of our community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Scollins to provide us with the update. And you're on mute.
Sorry about that. You would think after 4 years I would have that mastered. But thank you, Madam Chair. I'll keep this brief, so we'll have more time for questions. But On January 23rd, I appointed the long-serving veteran town committee member and procurement expert, Bob McCarthy, as my designate to be the chair of this very important committee. He brings 30 years of experience in procurement in this town and serving on many committees. So certainly a solid choice in my view. He didn't ask to serve in this position, but he graciously accepted the appointment and has been charged with managing this effort in accordance with the motion passed at the the November 20th, 2023 special town meeting. Bob has requested secretarial assistance to accomplish the task, and Human Resources is working on finding someone to fill that role. In short, the assignment of the committee is to draft an RFP, a request for proposal, bid it competitively, and select a vendor to perform the work articulated in the RFP, all in accordance with the state's procurement laws. So, so that was the charge of what was voted at town meeting, and my role in this as the town's chief procurement officer was to select a chair to manage the committee. And from this point forward, Mr. McCarthy will be the one who will be doing just that in every aspect, not me.
So with that, I will open it up to the committee if folks have questions or that they'd like to raise or comments they want to discuss. Dave?
Thank you, Cindy. So based on public statements Mr. McCarthy made at the special town meeting, he called the article legally unenforceable, urged the town to stop pandering to the disruptive minority and move on. So I guess I'm not sure how a person like this could be in charge to move forward with an audit when they don't really believe in it. For instance, we wouldn't put the opposition in charge of rebuilding the Galvin Middle School or rebuilding St. Gerard's. And that's what we've done in this case. So in my opinion, I feel that this is going to be a giant misappropriation of $200,000. And it's just should be something needs to be worked out where we use a different designee in town. And I know that our committee doesn't have any ability to change this, but the appointing authority, Mr. Scollins, does have the ability to change this under Mass General Law, Chapter 30D, Section 19. He could rescind the appointment, and what I would suggest is he use a special counsel with a mass procurement certification to oversee the process, and someone who's outside of the county due to the fact that we have a federal investigation into the investigation, and we don't even know who in the town is under investigation. So with that said, I would suggest that Mr. Scollins, please change the designee.
Would Madam Chair, would you like me to respond? Yes.
Please do. Sorry, I'm muted because I'm getting a lot of feedback.
All right. Would you like me to respond?
Yes, please. Please.
So Dave, I truly respect your opinion, your right to your opinion. We don't share that though. I'm fully aware of public statements that were made by Mr. McCarthy as a private citizen, as many statements were made by many as private citizens on either side of the issue. But that aside, that's those are opinions of a private citizen. Mr. McCarthy's role and the role of all of us as appointed officials here is to operate with integrity, with our charge, with our role. And based on my experience with Mr. McCarthy, I fully believe that he will operate with complete integrity in completing this assignment. I have no reason to believe otherwise. As far as going through choosing a different designee in a process that you described, I appreciate the recommendation, but this was an authority that the town, by vote, granted to the chief procurement officer, who happens to be me at this time. And this, I truly believe, is the best individual who could manage this important committee based on his experience, 30 years, his ability to manage difficult projects. You brought up the Galvin School. What if people with differing views that supported the Galvin School were to manage that project? Well, Mr. McCarthy is a significant player on the school building committee, and I don't know if you watch those meetings, but he has been very critical of the architects, the owner's project manager on the cost, and has been very clear that he is expecting them to work harder at bringing the cost down. So I see him as somebody who's working in the best interest of the taxpayer, but in a collaborative way to bring an important project like that to fruition, just like I believe he will do the exact same thing with this project. I truly do believe that. And again, I didn't make the selection lightly. And again, Bob didn't volunteer for this. I surveyed who was a viable candidate for this, who had the experience, who was willing to do this work, who did not have direct line to the select board or the police department, because I was respecting the statements made by the petitioners that they did not want people with those kinds of connections to head this committee. And that's the primary reason that I removed myself from managing this committee, because I believe, as you all know, I report directly to the entire board and to the town administrator. So my not participating in managing this committee was in deference to the wishes of the petitioners. So again, I have every full faith and confidence that Mr. McCarthy will manage this project well and with distinction. So I have no reservations on the selection.
And one more just brief statement, Cindy, if I may. I reached out to Mr. McCarthy to become citizen at large. He immediately rejected me, said he already had 2 people, wouldn't tell me who they were. It's in the bylaws that people who are selected need to be filed with the town clerk immediately. He said he would release them whenever he wanted. That's inappropriate to do. And he's not a private citizen. He works as a special employee for the town.
I can't speak to how Bob is going to manage the selection process. What I do know is that he has to manage it in accordance with the way the article was voted. And that is exactly what he's going to do.
So I want to go next to Juliana. You has your hand raised.
Just have 2 quick questions. First one being, do you, Randy, stay involved on some level in terms of oversight and moving the process forward, or is it now completely out of your hands?
It is very much out of my hands. I am not planning to oversee the work of the committee. The chair would do that. The chair is fully capable of doing that. I'm not going to meddle with that. I want to keep arm's length from that whole process for all the reasons I just stated. There's really no reason for me to be involved at this point, other than in a very ministerial way, which would be to help him to obtain some secretarial assistance through human resources, who's agreed to find somebody for him. And then ultimately, after the committee has completed their work without my involvement, developing the request for proposal agreed upon by the committee, the role that I would have, if any, and only if asked by Mr. McCarthy, would be to publish the RFP, meaning put it out on all the usual sites that it would go, and ensure that it gets posted in accordance with Chapter 30B procurement laws. But I will have no material involvement at all in this work.
So then you may not have information about my second question, which is, do you know if there is an intended cap on the amount that's going to be spent on an assistant? I think part of the concern is there's a limited pot that's been allocated to this. Do you know if there is an intention?
That's a multi-part question. So first off, I think I've seen in some communiques that some are of the opinion that any administrative costs associated with this project shouldn't be within the $200,000 that was funded. That is not the way the article reads. The entire project will be funded with the $200,000, including the administrative costs, which should be relatively de minimis, given that it's hourly rate for secretarial services and any mailings and copying and things like that that would happen. And so as far as the net amount, which will be the overwhelming majority of what was appropriated, we'll see what the procurement process brings. But based on my experience, I think that amount is well more than sufficient to hire an extremely well qualified consultant to do this work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rita, I do see your hand. I'm going to go to the committee first to see whether we have any other comments from committee members, and then we will go to members of the public. Rini, I will ask a question. Then I'll go to Amelia. One of the things that I have heard, and I think this relates to Kristen's question, was that there was also a consulting fee involved for Mr. McCarthy, and I'd ask you to maybe address that.
That is untrue. This is an unpaid assignment, just like all of Mr. McCarthy's volunteer work on all the various boards and committees that he served on.
Thank you. Amelia?
Thanks, Cindy, and Randy. Obviously, this is a difficult situation to oversee because the majority of people in town have opinions. And, I think the article is the roadmap and the safety net, because it is entrenched in the article that certain things need to be done. And I think, the public will also be able to follow this process, attend meetings going forward. These are open meetings. And, despite someone might have an opinion one way or the other, that open process can guarantee, or at least better ensure, that, the spirit and letter of that article is implemented. And in the end, it will lead to an independent auditor being procured, which will then provide a report that will be public and be reported at a future town meeting. And so I think there's a lot of, even though, there's lots of concerns, and I respect a lot of the concerns, there's a lot of opportunities here for transparency, a lot of opportunities for participation or involvement. And so I think that, we do have to understand it's a really difficult situation. And there's always going to be some, concerns as we go through the process. But I think that the town meeting sponsored a process and an appropriation to try to, bring our community back together by trying to better, see what may or may not need some addressing. And so, I think we need to have a little bit of faith and confidence in a process that the people of the town through town meeting, the voters supported. And, that's a process, we can, as a community, continue to monitor as we go.
Thank you for your comments, Emilio. I just wanted to highlight one particular aspect of what you said, and that is that this entire committee process will be public. These will be public meetings. I'd be surprised if they weren't broadcast meetings. I'm hoping that they will be. So certainly, in my view, that's a true check and balance on how this is going to unfold, where any interested party in the community, who has concerns or is interested in how this is going to unfold, is going to be able to fully observe, either live at the meeting or watching on cable and commenting, around that. So again, another reason why I am highly confident that in that fishbowl of a process, that we will get a result that the community is looking for.
One of the things that I'll just say is, having had a chance to talk to you, Randy, and hearing you talk through your decision, how you got to this decision, was certainly helpful. I think one of the things we talked about a lot in the preparation for the special town meeting was some of the issues around perception. And I think, I think that, it may turn out that Mr. McCarthy does a great job and it all goes well. I think it's really hard for many of us to get beyond his very sort of clear and direct message about how he felt about all of this. And so I think that's a hard one to get beyond. When and I had conversations with him outside of town meeting, bump into him somewhere and so I think that, for the general public, for those who've been intimately involved in all of this, I think that's feels like a really big lift and a big ask to kind of get beyond that. I think the other lesson learned for me, I'm going to be perfectly frank, is I think we have a number of the petitioners here with us this evening. We all worked really hard to try to figure out how to get all of this through. I certainly think I have some lessons learned for me about the impact that language has. Things like when we say to be selected by the petitioners, and the reality is there were 300 of them. How does that work? And I don't think we ever really thought that through and discussed it in terms of, to be, and I don't have the language right in front of me, but it's nominated. But when you have three, the language says by the petitioners, and the petitioners are all those people who signed the petition for the town meeting. And so I certainly, and I'm sorry because I'm like, yeah, why didn't I think of that when we were back there? I think it also represents the challenges of having a large ad hoc group that has done meaningful and important work in the community, but yet is ad hoc in many ways and doesn't have, clear, defined leadership, if you will, or structure. And maybe it does, and I'm just not aware of that, and I love to be educated on that. But I just, as I kind of look at some of this and I try to reflect on some of it, I'm kind of like, there's definitely some lessons learned here for future work. And I see some of the challenges that we face with this going forward. Because the way the language reads is nominated by the petitioners. And I hear that being interpreted very clearly, but I don't know what else you would do. When you have 300 petitioners, what do you do to get those nominations? I think that those are real and legitimate issues. that need to be considered. So I just sort of be very honest here and say I have a lot of lessons learned through this process that I hope I will take into future work. Other committee comments before we turn it over to some some of our voters, members of our community. Okay, hearing none. Rita, could you just introduce yourself and then?
Yes.
Rita
Lombardi.
Address, no address.
Yeah, Rita Lombardi, no address. I'm a Canton resident. And my question is to Mr. Scollins, and I do have a couple of questions. So I hope, I was with Kathleen and, and like you said, Mr. Thomas, is that, an enormous effort went into this. The citizens pulled this off and spent enormous effort, myself included, to rally citizens. We got over 2,000 people to a special town meeting, and 903 brave people raised their hand in a hostile environment where there was open bullying for people to raise their hand for this audit. They wanted an independent audit. And I guess my first question is that the petitioners made it very clear that they did not want someone who was affiliated with the police department or that was an embedded town employee, because they wanted someone who could be objective. And in your announcement letter, Mr. Scollins, you proudly said that Bob sat on the building renovations committee for 30 years. Well, our police chiefs have sat on that and they still sit on that. So Bob has sat side by side with the police chiefs of this town for at least 20 years. And he is an embedded town employee. So my question to you, Mr. Scollins, is how do you reconcile that when the voters made it clear that they did not want that type of individual? How do you reconcile that?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Lombardi. That was a big part of the challenge of trying to select the most appropriate person with the experience to manage a procurement like this. I would challenge anybody here to find somebody in the community that is a town employee that didn't have an opinion one way or the other. No opinion is right or wrong, but that's the challenge here, is that everybody's got an opinion. Everybody,
If I
myself
could respond,
included.
if I
So,
could
so can
respond,
I finish? Can
Sure.
I finish? Thank you. So that indeed, as the Madam Chair stated, that was the biggest challenge, was to find somebody who I believe possessed the integrity to work beyond any personal opinion that they had. Having worked with Bob, and I think most of us here on this committee in town government, we work side by side with members of every department: police, fire, DPW, select board office, clerk's office. So it's a needle in a haystack to find somebody who has no opinion and has zero affiliation. In affiliation, you're drawing a pretty gray line, but just because they sit on a committee with somebody from another department, that then biases them or boxes them out. I thought through all that, and it was just an unreconcilable issue to land on the quote perfect, from a perception basis, perfect individual to head this committee. So that's where I had to focus on the underlying integrity and experience of the individual. And at the end of the day, I selected Bob because I believe he possessed all of those qualities and that I believe he will show us that he can satisfy the intent of this article to everybody's satisfaction.
If I may,
So read it out. I'm mindful that, so if you have an additional question, and then I want to go to Kathleen.
okay, great. So if I may, people who sit on committees, the committees are working on projects. Would you not agree, Mr. Scollins? Okay, so I
Committees
have.
work on many things.
Right, but this is a project. Sourcing vendors, working on an RFP, it's a project, right? So I have 30 years experience in the corporate world in project leadership. And never, ever would a business organization elect someone or select someone to spearhead a committee or even sit on a committee if they did not believe in the project's objectives. And Bob clearly does not believe in the objectives, and that is to do an independent audit. He made that very clear that he does not believe in this. And so you wouldn't want somebody who doesn't have an opinion. You want somebody who believes in the cause. Just like if you had a football team, you wouldn't put a quarterback in that doesn't want to play football. You want somebody who's going to lead the team. And Bob, in integrity. So, you want somebody who believes in the cause. Bob does not believe in the cause. So that in itself tells me it's a setup for failure. Because it just is. Look, any project management, you would never, ever do that. And in terms of integrity, the warrant articles said that 2 members would be nominated by the petitioners and 2 community members at large would be nominated too and selected by the chief procurement officer or his designee. As soon as Bob was elected, he already had 2 people. He didn't even go through a process. And in your letter, so that speaks to integrity to me, that we got a problem here because he's not even following the article. And in terms of that statement, it said in your announcement letter, you also put that it would form, the petitioners now were subject to a democratic and transparent process. I'm not sure where you saw that language in the article that was voted on. So can you explain to us where that language came from?
So you made a lot of points there, Ms. Lombardi. So if I could address them all,
Oh, that'd be
including that
awesome.
last one. Excellent. So after Mr. McCarthy had agreed to be appointed to the committee, the first thing that I did, which is what I explained to anyone who expressed an interest in the committee to me, you all received the exact same response from me on what would happen when my designee was selected, that I would turn over all of the statements of interest that I had received to the designee for that person's consideration for selection of or nomination of 2 citizen at large members. So Mr. McCarthy never stated to me that he had already determined who was going to be on the committee. His starting point was all of the documentation that I provided to him. So I don't know where he is in the process, because that is not my concern at this point, because I trust that he's going to follow the language in the article, which is that people have nominated themselves. They're suggesting that they want to be on the committee. The citizen at large folks have suggested they want to be on the committee. Anybody can do that. Anybody can nominate somebody to be a citizen at large on the committee to Mr. McCarthy. Mr. McCarthy can nominate folks. Any one of you could nominate somebody. And it is the chair's authority under this article to select anyone who is, quote, nominated to be the citizen at large if the chair believes that those folks have the best experience to be successful with this committee. So, I'm not aware of any pre-decisions that Mr. McCarthy made. He never shared anything like that with me. I gave him everything that I had received, and he was off from there. And again, as far as your point about integrity, I guess the point that I made earlier this evening about any individual is entitled to put forward their opinion, as a private citizen. Everybody on this Zoom and everybody in the town does that. Mr. McCarthy's entitled to do that. But once they are in their public role, which he wasn't in a public role when he was standing at town meeting floor making his comments as a citizen, but once he's in the public role, like all of us in public roles, we are held to a higher standard to be professional and conduct ourselves with integrity. And Mr. McCarthy is somebody who exemplifies that. With regards to how I interpreted that the petitioners, the two members of the committee to be selected by the petitioners, would be through a democratic process. Well, if you read the plain language, which you just did, it's pretty clear that the petitioners, meaning all of the folks who signed the petition, need to be engaged to nominate two people to be on the committee. So how do you do that with hundreds of people who are associated with that petition? You have to go through a nomination process. The petitioners have to be asked, who do you want to be on the committee? And in essence, a vote. That's democracy. And so that's a pretty clear line between the language in the article and how it actually plays out.
But you inserted language that wasn't there. And people came to Kathleen and I and nominated us, the petitioners, and asked us to be on the committee. They not only asked us to be on the committee, they want us to run for select board. That's how much faith they have in us. So
that's fantastic. So I'm expecting that if that is indeed the case, then that would ultimately be the result of the nominating process that needs to be conducted for the petitioners.
So you're saying that your process was, and you announced in the paper for people to email you with interest, and we spoke to the petitioners and the petitioners came to us. So why do we need to go through an expense? If you want signatures, we're happy to get those for you. We'll just take the list of the petitioners and we'll go door to door to get them. That way you don't have to pay a secretary to do a mailing and letters. Not that I agree with what you're saying, but if you want signatures, we'll get them for you.
It's not your process to run. It's the chair's process to run.
And so we now have
running
elections.
the process. He's running the process as it is laid out in the article. You can differ with what that language means, and I respect your right to differ on that. But I see it very differently than you do.
So you inserted language into the article that you felt was appropriate, and then you delegated it to Bob, and now you have hands off. Is that what you're telling me?
I did not insert language into
Yes,
the
you
article.
did.
The article
Yes,
was
you
voted
did.
by town meeting.
I'm gonna pause here, Rita, please. We're not
Okay.
here to argue. I really want to provide an opportunity for listening. I think there may be differences of opinion this evening about this. I'd like to actually, I know Catherine's had her hand up. I'd like to have an opportunity from her, but this is not, I think it's important for people to be able to express their concerns, put those issues on the table. But I don't think, I'm hoping that everyone here is listening. I think that is the goal for this evening. We're not gonna have an argument. So
I
Kathleen,
appreciate that, and I'm sorry.
that's okay, no problem. We're all here for good cause, right? We all, I think for me, I sort of sit here and say, at least I can speak for myself, that there are honorable intentions here. We all want this to come out well. This is important to our community. It's important for hopefully our community to move forward. It's also important because we're going to spend taxpayers' money, and it has to happen and be done right and have a productive process that comes out on the other end. So I think, I'd like to think that we all have a common goal. We may not agree about how we get there, and I'm not inserting my opinion here in it as much as trying to reflect what I hear. Kathleen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kathleen Howley, Canton resident. I was the lead petitioner. I started the petition. We did have a structure. You don't have a project that ends up with over 1,700 people showing up for a town meeting when 300, before this would have been great, without having a structure. So we certainly did have a structure. I'd be glad to tell you all about it, maybe not in this venue, but anybody who would like to know about our structure. We had a core group of people who worked very hard, and you know what? We're not activists, we're moms. So we're not thinking like, we don't, we have idle hours that we need to fill. Maybe we'll take up a hobby or, no, we're concerned about the safety of people in town, and particularly the town that we're raising our children in. So that's where we're coming from. I will say that I do appreciate very much Randy acknowledging his conflicts, which anybody can see that if I am being paid by somebody and that's helping me pay my mortgage, then what they have to say is going to be pretty darn important. And I would want to make them happy. And we all understand that because we all have mortgages and we all have paychecks. I do appreciate you acknowledging that, Randy. I will say though that what don't you understand?
The point is lost on me. The point is lost on me. This acknowledgement of conflicts. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to tell you before you say that I agree with that. I don't understand what you're saying.
You acknowledged when you were speaking that you had a conflict because you report directly to the select board.
I did.
I hear
Yes.
that? Yes.
Yes, but you just
That's
said
what I'm
Mr.
talking
McCarthy,
about.
I believe.
No, she said
No, I'm talking about you, Randy.
Okay.
And you then said to solve that conflict, you picked Mr. McCarthy, and that was a way to address that conflict. But when you picked Mr. McCarthy, you picked the person that would make our select board, who were adamantly opposed to this. We all saw them, like John standing in rage after, the vote was counted. You picked the person that would make them the most happy because you picked the person who spoke the most vehemently against this. And not, yes, we all get to have our views as private citizens. And certainly the people who worked to have the police audit are in favor of the police audit. But we usually do appoint people to committees who are in favor of the goal of that committee. So I would say that picking Mr. McCarthy, I don't think is a solution to that conflict. In fact, I would say it made it worse. I would also add that the number 200,000, I would hope that you would think this of us, that we don't just show up at the select board meetings and like wing it. We know we research, we come informed, and that's how we approach this. And we got the $200,000 not out of picking it out of the air. We called the highly respected companies. One of us, that was her sole task, was to research this. I was on Zoom calls, and that's about what it costs to get a top-notch firm to do an independent audit, a thorough audit for a police department that has never had that done before. So that adds to the cost. So that is what we found in our research would be what it would cost to have a top-notch, highly respected firm that the taxpayers, that had the reputation that the taxpayers would see those results and be able to have confidence in it. Now, there's no mention, the $200,000 was to hire the independent auditor. There's no mention of secretarial. We all read English, so I'm saying, I'm not even sure you can say this is my opinion. It's a matter of fact that in the article, it talks about using that money to hire an auditor. So that appropriation is not mentioned at all. I'd also mention that you've come up with this election, and the town is having a very tightly compressed election cycle right now. That's how we do our town elections. It's a very short cycle. And you're throwing out an election now, and we don't have secretaries running elections in Canton. That we don't do that. That's not an election. So I really would question that as well. And this idea of picking someone who would bring us together, you picked the person who would drive us. You could not have picked a person who would make the petitioners more unhappy. It would not be possible. So you have picked a person who has had the opposite effect of what you say you wanted to do. And when you spoke to the Canton Citizen in the November, sorry, I think it was November 30th article, and I was
23rd.
very happy to see. Sorry.
23rd.
What? Okay. For some reason, I thought it was on. Was that when it came out? Regardless, there was no mention of an election. I was at the Fin-Comm meeting when they were coming up with the wording, and I mean, my understanding is the core group of petitioners would put forth 2 names, and
They
and
will.
can I just point out though, you're interrupting me a lot.
I'm sorry, please proceed.
Thank you. So when this amendment was, and I watched the FinCom, I was very impressed with the diligent efforts and the sincerity of FinCom putting this together. But I don't think it never occurred to me that FinCom was saying, let's have an election. I assumed that FinCom was going to leave it up to the petitioners, to that core group that got the signatures and brought this effort, to fruition. So there's been a lot that I think has been added. And I just want to once again say, I almost want to say congratulations. You have picked the one person that will drive us, that will drive this town the most apart. I mean, that's like a superlative. You could not have picked someone, because this was a person at the special town meeting who denounced it the most vehemently and the most angrily, that this was illegal. And it was, these disruptive people, I forget, those weren't his exact words. Like, no, we're moms who our children are growing up in this town. And we're taxpayers who are happy to pay the more than $6 million a year, so happy to do that. We just want to make sure our money is being well spent. And for that, we were vilified. So I think that you've really picked the worst person. If you wanted to pick somebody, if you wanted to drive the town apart, you picked the best person. I will say that. And with that, I'll yield the floor.
So next, I'd actually like to go to Karen. One of the FinCom members would like to comment.
Thanks, Cindy. I just had a question. So the way that the article was written and the motion was written back at special town meeting, Randy, as the chief procurement officer, was going to lead this committee and be the person who picked the 3 to 5 members with relevant experience in procurements, et cetera. So I guess my question to you, Randy, is what changed from the time when that was written and we were discussing this until you decided to pick a designee for yourself? I don't understand what changed from one point to the other for you to decide to do that.
Sure. I don't think I could have been any clearer, particularly in this discussion tonight and at the FinCom meetings, is that I made that decision out of respect for the petitioners. They clearly said they didn't want people directly aligned with the select board and the police and the select board and the police. I am directly reporting into the select board. So that was out of respect for the petitioners that I did not want to tread on that.
Okay. Thank you.
Dave?
Thank you, Cindy. So 2 quick points. How do you have an election for people with procurement experience, 300 or so people, where some people may not even have procurement experience? And second point is, was that letter approved by the Inspector General for the designee appointment prior to you releasing the article in the Citizen?
To your last point, Dave, there's no Inspector General requirement to approve what the Chief Procurement Officer was authorized to do in that in that motion. I'm sorry, what was the first part of your question again, Dave?
It's in regard to the procurement experience and how you're going to pick those people. But in regard to Chapter 30B laws, I believe there is the designee has to be the appointment letter has to be sent over to the Inspector General.
That's an procurement. Primarily, that has to do with the procurement official of the town, which I'm clearly on record with the state as the chief procurement official with the town. But to your point about the nominating process for the petitioners to put forward 2 people for the to the committee, it's a nominating process, and nominating process is to suggest someone for a position. And so the petitioners can nominate who they see fit to the individual who is then authorized to select from who is nominated. And so the chair is in the position to evaluate the nominations to see if they, comply with the requirements or not, and has the discretion to select potentially the top 2 that get put forward by the petitioners that may or may not have all of the requisite procurement experience. So again, it's it's not a law.
That
It's-
sounded like a
it's
change
the-
from a vote
it's the-
to the chair is going to assign the petitioners. It's constantly an evolving fluid situation we have here. It doesn't seem black or white the way it should be.
Well, that's not, the article is written in a certain way, and that's what frames the process.
So I'm gonna go next to Tim McKenna, and then unless I want to add additional comments only if they bring in some new information. Not necessarily, I don't want to cut off discussion, but we're approaching 10 o'clock. And as I said, we're here this evening to listen, to understand the concerns, but the Finance Committee is not in a position to act or do something different. So I really, we want to hear, we want to listen. I think Randy wants to hear and listen. But I want to also be mindful of the role of the Finance Committee here. Tim?
Yeah, thanks, Cindy. And I appreciate everything I'm hearing tonight. And I'm also conscious of the fact that it's almost 10 o'clock, so I'll try to keep this brief. But I think I just have a couple of comments, and then I think a question for Randy. I don't know. I know of Mr. McCarthy. I haven't worked, kind of directly with him or closely with him. But I guess I do have faith in Randy that he will pick somebody that will not, I'm not concerned that he believe in a particular cause or want to make any particular group happy, but that what he'll want to do is run a procurement process that will, select a quality outside consultant that will conduct a review of the Canton Police Department, which I think is what everyone is looking for. And I guess my question to Randy is, I think the underlying concern here is that, maybe Mr. McCarthy is going to, run this process in such a way that, he ends up saying, I couldn't find anybody. We couldn't complete the procurement process, and we couldn't select a consultant, or is going to select a consultant that's somehow unacceptable and won't do a quality job. So I certainly hope that that's not the process, and I trust what Randy has seen in Mr. McCarthy, that is not where we're headed. But I guess my question for Randy, and this will play out in public. So I guess what would be the recourse if people start to feel that the process isn't being run, in a quality way, or getting to the selection of a consultant? What would be the recourse at that point?
Thank you for the question, Tim, in the comments. I guess if that scenario were to play out, which I highly doubt it will, in the negative, I guess the recourse would be, for something like this, what it always is in a community, is to bring forward this process again, bring forward this article again, get another vote, write the article differently. So it's handled differently than what was voted at town meeting. I fully don't expect that to happen, but given that this was a vote of town meeting in a very structured motion, I think if people ultimately are unsatisfied with the way it unfolds, they could do it again. I certainly hope that doesn't happen, because I have every faith that it won't, but I believe that's the recourse.
So I want to make 2 comments, and we'll go to Rita, and then we'll wrap up for this evening. I first want to acknowledge, Kathleen, I am aware that there was a core group of folks who worked very hard. And when I said that there wasn't, it was just, it's not a formal group that has an elected chair and a vice chair. And, I think I was referring more to the formal kind of structure. So I don't think anybody could not be aware that there were many people behind the scenes and a core group who were working on this. The second, and I'm not saying that there's a blank check by any means, but I think that certainly if the Procurement Committee goes out to bid on this and the amount that is available to spend on this search is not adequate, we do have a Finance Committee. And that would be an appropriate issue for the committee to bring forward to the Finance Committee for discussion. This would not be the first time that a bid happened that ended up in some way outside of an initial appropriation. I mean, we don't, and Randy, if I'm kind of stepping out of my lane here, you could rein me in. But
no, I completely agree with your points, Madam Chair. I completely agree with the points you're making.
We have reserve fund, for example, and while this isn't the same as HVAC for the library or other kinds of things like that, I would want to make sure that the petitioners and anyone involved in this would know that we need to make sure we get the bid. I think it was specifically intended that this not be the lowest bidder, that it be the bidder who is most qualified, and so if that becomes an issue, I think we certainly would hope to hear from this committee, and that is within our purview. So with that, Rita, some final comments.
Yes, I just had, so Bob is the person that you designated, and even though you designated him, the outcome still sits on you. So the outcome of this will be a reflection of you, whether he does a great job or not a great job, because that's just what leaders do. And Bob, I would expect is going to pick 2 like-minded people from whoever he can choose from. And so when we have the chair and 2 people from the community at large who have been opposed to this audit, and then you have 2 petitioners who were supportive of it, that's an imbalance right there. That's a 60%, that's an imbalance. And so how do you expect there to be productive conversations and discussions if it is that imbalanced of a committee?
Thank you for the questions, Ms. Lombardi. I would say to your main point about, quote, committee members who may be perceived to be opposed to the audit, that's not an option. This project has to go forward. The vendor has to be selected. The work has to be done. So that has to happen. And that has to be done through collegiality of the committee. So I don't expect, just because there may be people who bring in different personal opinions to the committee, that it's going to result in there will be no vendor selected and there will be no professional vendor conducting what the community is expecting to be done. I fully expect it to be done. So I don't agree with that premise at all.
Well, there may
I'm
be a
going to take
difference.
Rita. I'm going to take one more comment from Tom Birmingham, who's raised his hand, and we haven't had an opportunity to speak from him. And then I am going to close out discussion on this for this evening. Oh, there you are, Tom. You moved on my screen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Finance Committee, for the opportunity to speak tonight and to hear out this issue. Thank you, Mr. Scollins, for doing your best to answer these questions under difficult circumstances. I know it's late, but as someone who worked very hard to try to ensure success in this process, I'll express my disappointment right now of how things are going. And in particular, one of the things I'm hoping to see come out of this is an improved accountability, transparency, and trust. And it feels to me like we're going in a different direction. And Mr. Scollins, I sure hope you're right. Because right now this is challenging, and what's adding fuel to the fire is, I'm going to throw another question in there, or another key word in there, is fairness. The addition of this transparent democratic process for the petitioners, as you have identified in your ideas and your words, is implied, in my opinion, in the motion or the article that was approved. There's no mention of that. If you look at the words that you're referring to be nominated by the petitioners, okay, you've gone to that next level. So it's very confusing to me what that process would look like. So my question to you is, have you spoken to the town clerk on what this democratic process would actually look like and how that would happen?
The town clerk has no role in this process. But when you say this, Tom, and I respect your opinion, and I respect where you stand on all of this. But when you say there's no mention of certain aspects of how this process needs to be run, you can say that about the entire article as it relates to what the ultimate objective is. There's very little meat on the bone about what ultimately should be in this request for proposal. There's some very high level points. They're important points, but they lack an incredible amount of specificity, which is what the work of this committee will do. So you will not be able to say at the end of this process that, wait a minute, this RFP was developed and it's reflecting things that weren't in the article or the motion. But that's exactly what's going to happen, because what this committee has to work with what was in the article and in the motion, is very limited. And that was stated in the Finance Committee meetings, is that the Finance Committee was put in a very difficult position to try to interpret and put something forward that would be positive, that was asked for. They did the best they could with the limited language that they were given. And so that translates out into how this request for proposal is going to be developed. There's going to be many things in there, I'm sure. I'm not going to be part of it, but that are not stated at all in the article of the motion. So again, so there's a level of understanding that's required as to, well, what was the intent? And the best that the committee can do is look at the motion that was passed to come up with their best interpretation of what the intent was. And that will result in other things that are nowhere in the article or the motion.
Tom?
Madam Chair, may I follow up, please? What you just responded to, Mr. Scollins, didn't answer my question with all due respect, and that is the democratic process that you put in your appointment letter. It's not clear to me exactly what that means. And so I understand there's a lot of work that's going to be needed to be done on the scope. And I'd like to address that real quickly if I could as well. But the democratic process, if the town clerk's not involved, and it doesn't apply to the designees process, it feels unfair and unclear. And I think that we need some clarification on how that's going to happen. Ms. Lombardi suggested we don't need that. You're pushing back. I guess at the end of the day, it's going to be Mr. McCarthy's decision.
It is, but I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, Tom, but I would like to respond to what you said.
Sure.
So within the language of the motion, I believe the word nominate is in there.
Mhm.
Nominate is a democratic principle. Individuals are nominated for positions. The country is going through a nomination process in every state. So that language is democratic language. And that is the framework of what was passed in that motion, is to conduct a nominating process. That is a democratic process. So again, I would just restate what I said before, which is if we can only use the exact words that are in the motion and not try to understand intent, this process won't go anywhere. And that's not going to serve anybody well. So I am firmly convinced that nominate implies a democratic process.
So, Tom, one more comment, and then we are going to take a join for the evening.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There is a language to nominate also that applies to the community at large members that doesn't seem to be articulated, that the same process is going to apply to the at large members as the petitioners members. That's the fairness issue that I'm struggling with. Madam Chair, may I just close on a request perhaps to whoever, if Mr. McCarthy's listening, I would like, and I've recommended to you, Mr. Scollins, in a 10-page memorandum that I wrote to you on my suggestions of how to proceed. I would strongly ask that Mr. McCarthy consider establishing selection criteria that's very clear, and we can point to that. If that criteria is not followed as part of the selection of this awarded contract to a consultant, if we don't do that, we're going to end up right back here, A. And B, I would also add, when the scoping of this contract is developed, that criteria also be established for that clarifies and expands on, and the committee agrees to what the terms are that are, as you noted, pretty thin in specificity, as mentioned in the article, related to administrative policy, procedures, and compliance review. That I think we really need to establish some criteria before we go down any further decision making. Thank you.
I agree with you, Tom, and that is the role of the committee to do that. They're going to have to flesh this out so that it ultimately reflects the will of the vote as reflected in the article. And that's my expectation of exactly how this will play out.
Kathleen, one more comment, but I ask you to be
Very
very, and then we
I
are going.
promise you that. I appreciate it, and I do promise to be 2 sentences, I think. The 3 no, what I anticipate will be 3 no votes on the committee can limit the scope to Tuesdays and Thursdays. I mean, I'm exaggerating to make a point. However, they can limit it however they want, and they can also limit what ends up in the report in ways we may not see in an open meeting. Thank you. I appreciate you allowing me to have one more. It's not just choosing the auditor. It's other ways, the scope and what's published.
It's sad to me of the presumptions that are being made here. Not
please.
even allowing a committee that's yet to be formed to start their work. So that's disappointing to me. I'm sorry I had to say that, but that's how I feel.
I feel very disappointed as well.
Kathleen, I think we've spent an hour,
Thank you.
more than an hour on this discussion. We really wanted to provide an opportunity, but I am going to bring this discussion to an end. And ask I just want to say thank you to everyone. I know it's not easy to come out here and bring forth your concerns and your perspectives. I really value that. I think the committee does. We're all here listening. And I thank you for taking that time. It matters. With that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Randy, can you do the roll call for us?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ruki,
Aye.
Kristen,
Aye.
Tim,
Aye.
Karen,
Aye.
Dan,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
Emilio,
Aye.
and Cindy.
Aye. Thank you,
Madam Chair,
everyone. Don't forget your homework to review the bylaw between now and the next meeting. So, we'll look forward to seeing everyone in a week. Thank you very much, everyone.
Recording stopped.
Thank
Have a
you.
good night.